Picture the night sky above Anzio, Italy, on February 24, 1944. Amidst the swirling chaos of combat, military personnel hurriedly positioned two complete signal core Radio 584 systems, burying them up to the roofs of their trailers before dawn. When darkness fell again, 12 German bombers breached the airspace over the beachhead, but their assault was abruptly halted when 90mm guns, guided by this new technology, obliterated 7 of the hostile aircraft. You can imagine how the sheer mathematics of that evening completely baffled German military intelligence for the duration of the conflict. Downing 7 out of 12 heavily armed bombers in pitch-black conditions resulted in a 58% success rate, which shattered every existing paradigm of anti-aircraft engagements. Prior to this historic encounter, artillery units required an average of 2,500 fired shells to secure a single confirmed kill, even under the most ideal daylight visibility. Aviators who managed to survive the ordeal returned with chilling reports of an entirely unprecedented phenomenon. They described relentless bursts of flak that seemingly shadowed their every evasive maneuver with impossible precision. It appeared to the terrified pilots as though the anti-aircraft detonations were predicting their cognitive choices, materializing exactly in the spatial coordinates where their planes were destined to arrive mere seconds later. What decimated those squadrons was neither extraordinary human marksmanship nor a stroke of blind luck, but rather the SCR-584, an automated microwave tracking radar that permanently transformed aerial defense strategies. This groundbreaking innovation remained essentially a mystery to the Axis powers for the entirety of the conflict, relentlessly degrading the combat capabilities of the Luftwaffe. Without even realizing the profound shift, German forces had unwittingly flown directly into the modernized future of warfare. The impending crisis for the German air fleet have actually been gestating since 1940, triggered when British researchers shared their highly guarded secrets with the United States via the decisive mission. These visiting scientists delivered a profoundly classified piece of hardware essential for engineering robust detection arrays, the 10-centimeter cavity magnetron. Handing over this particular technological marvel triggered a cascade of strategic consequences that completely exceeded the initial expectations of both Allied nations. As German engineering teams plodded along traditional developmental routes, relying on meter-wave systems, brilliant minds stationed at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology's Radiation Laboratory were forging something truly revolutionary. Their crowning achievement, the SCR-584, stood as an absolute marvel of its era. The apparatus possessed the capability to identify hostile aircraft from a distance of 40 miles, while maintaining a stunning range accuracy of just 75 feet. This defensive network functioned on microwave bandwidths that rendered it entirely invisible to standard German sensory equipment. It actively broadcasted at frequencies ranging between 2,700 and 2,900 megahertz, utilizing a 10 to 11 centimeter wavelength, while emitting 300 kilowatt pulses lasting 0.8 microseconds, alongside a repetition rate of 1,707 pulses per second. Consequently, enemy warning receivers, specifically calibrated to pick up older British arrays running at 200 to 600 megahertz, were completely oblivious to these advanced signals. You must understand that the technological disparity extended far beyond simple variations in broadcasting frequencies. The American apparatus utilized automatic tracking driven by conical scanning, where the primary beam spun continuously on its axis to form a cone capable of locking onto and pursuing targets entirely free from human input. By interfacing this array with the M9 gun director, a sophisticated analog computer harboring 160 vacuum tubes, the combined machinery could output 30 firing solutions per second, flawlessly adjusting for wind velocity, atmospheric density, target speed, and the gravitational arc of the projectile. Introducing this equipment at the Anzio beachhead represented a definitive turning point in the history of aerial defense. Enemy bombing raids abruptly ceased for an entire week, and when a lone reconnaissance plane finally arrived to probe the perimeter, it was instantly vaporized. The military swiftly installed 10 additional radar units during that time frame, effectively neutralizing any remaining airborne threats to the sector, leaving veteran German crews thoroughly paralyzed by a defensive barrier unlike anything they had encountered in years. The true devastating power of this installation originated from its absolute autonomy on the battlefield. The moment an operator confirmed a hostile signature and engaged the automatic mode, the radar securely fastened onto the intruder, tenaciously mirroring every frantic dive or roll. This live telemetry flowed straight into the director unit, plotting the exact future coordinates of interception, which then commanded 4 linked 90mm artillery pieces to pivot in flawless, synchronized harmony. Axis aviators continuously reported encountering a terrifying battlefield anomaly that defied their logical comprehension. If a pilot initiated a steep dive, artillery shells were already waiting to detonate at the projected bottom of that descent, and if they banked sharply, explosive clouds mysteriously populated their intended flight path. This was fundamentally different from traditional barrage tactics. It was an execution of lethal precision by automated mechanisms, capable of processing mathematics far faster than any human reflexes could manage. While European scientists were meticulously handcrafting individual sensor arrays in isolated workshops, the United States mobilized its industrial might to manufacture the SCR-584 with the rhythmic efficiency of automobile factories. Facilities churned out approximately 1,700 of these electronic workhorses to establish robust atmospheric shields. The Chrysler Corporation, operating as the lead contractor, seamlessly implemented assembly line methodologies that elevated radar construction from a delicate artisanal craft into a booming industrial enterprise. Records indicate that by August 31, 1943, 610 functioning units had already been dispatched to the front lines. Shortly thereafter, on January 28, 1944, the Dodge Division rolled out system number 1470 while distributing 628 supplementary units to the United States Marine Corps, coastal defense installations, and spare parts depots, achieving an aggregate total of 2,098. Remarkably, the manufacturing output of this solitary corporation eclipsed the entire wartime radar production of the German nation, brilliantly highlighting a profound ideological chasm in how both sides approached wartime industry. Enemy Würzburg detection arrays demanded highly specialized technicians for assembly, resulting in idiosyncratic machines that varied slightly from one another. Conversely, the American design prioritized interchangeable components and a modular architecture, enabling lightly trained infantrymen to execute rapid repairs directly on the battlefield. Ultimately, where the Axis powers managed to assemble mere dozens, the Allied forces engineered thousands, eventually deploying 39 specially modified units during the June 6, 1944 invasion to completely neutralize aerial assaults over the landing zones. Meticulously waterproofed for the harsh amphibious environment, these defensive machines established an impenetrable protective canopy over the most massive invasion armada ever assembled. Oberst Josef Pips Priller, standing as one of the mere 2 Luftwaffe aviators who dared to strike the Normandy beaches on D-Day, miraculously survived to recount the harrowing ordeal. During post-war interrogations, he vividly articulated facing an onslaught of anti-aircraft fire, entirely foreign to his 5 years of frontline combat experience. Rather than blind barrages, he encountered meticulously aimed munitions that demanded relentless, evasive actions, effectively crippling any chance of a successful strike, and proving that the ultimate failure of the German Air Force at Normandy was dictated by superior technology rather than a deficit of pilot bravery. Aviators of the Luftwaffe inadvertently plunged into a sophisticated technological snare that completely baffled them. The handful of flyers who made it back alive recounted the exact same terrifying experience previously seen at Anzio, describing ground defenses that appeared capable of telepathy, anticipating their every twist and turn long before the pilots even made them. The campaign to neutralize Hitler's 51 vengeance weapons offered the most compelling proof of the SCR-584 radar's groundbreaking power. Although these flying bombs hurtled forward in perfectly straight paths at a steady altitude and 400 miles per hour, making them theoretically perfect targets, their sheer velocity rendered them practically invincible against traditional targeting techniques. To stem the tide of V-1 flying bombs devastating London, 20 SCR-584 systems were rapidly deployed along the English Channel coastline. Supported by 80 artillery pieces firing innovative proximity-fused ammunition, these units obliterated hundreds of incoming threats, culminating in a spectacular Sunday where 97 out of 101 missiles were blasted out of the sky. The meticulously recorded statistics highlighted a complete paradigm shift in ground-to-air defense protocols. During the initial week of operation on the coast, artillery batteries intercepted 17% of all flying bombs entering their sector, a figure that surged to 60% by the 23rd of August and reached 74% during the month's final week, peaking on one remarkable day when 82% of the targets were eradicated. Ammunition expenditure plummeted dramatically, dropping from 2,500 rounds fired per destroyed V-1 down to a mere 100 shells. This staggering 25-fold leap in ballistic efficiency signified far more than a minor upgrade. It represented the historic juncture where ground-based defenses definitively overpowered airborne attackers. Watching from the French shoreline, astonished German personnel witnessed their missiles being dismantled by incredibly brief, surgical volleys of just 3 or 4 rounds, a spectacle that defied every established doctrine of anti-aircraft combat. Germany's absolute failure to recognize the looming menace of the SCR-584 was rooted in a catastrophic scientific blunder. Back in January 1943, leading radar specialists, under the direction of Professor Abraham Esau, had persuaded their military superiors that utilizing centimeter-wave frequencies was a physical impossibility, arguing that these wavelengths would yield too little returning energy to be practically useful. Relying heavily on this fundamentally defective theoretical framework, the High Command completely shut down all domestic investigations into microwave radar technology. By the time Wehrmacht troops recovered an intact British H-2S radar unit in February 1943, and realized it actively utilized the allegedly impossible centimeter waves, the shocking discovery arrived far too late to salvage their position. The Reich had already slipped several years behind in the microwave race, creating a technological chasm that was utterly insurmountable under wartime conditions. Consequently, military intelligence continuously misread the growing mountain of proof regarding Allied sensor supremacy, carelessly dismissing their own aviators' tales of uncanny artillery precision as the simple result of better optical sights, enhanced gunner training, or a massive increase in weapon density. The terrifying reality that the United States had perfected automated microwave frequency tracking remained entirely outside the realm of German imagination until the closing months of 1944. Throughout that critical year, the electronic warfare detachments of the Luftwaffe were still heavily relying on outdated equipment engineered for a bygone era of conflict. While their FUG-227 Flensburg receivers fruitlessly scanned the spectrum between 170 and 220 MHz, the slightly more advanced FUG-350 Naxos monitored the 2,500 to 3,750 MHz band, which was closer to the target frequency, but entirely incapable of consistently picking up the new American transmissions. The deepest flaw lay in the basic design philosophy of German warning systems, which was strictly built to alert pilots when traditional search beams briefly washed over their airframes. Conversely, the SCR-584 utilized an advanced, comical scanning technique that locked onto a specific target continuously, generating a uniquely steady emission signature that Axis hardware simply failed to register as a lethal threat. As a direct consequence, countless Luftwaffe crews unknowingly flew straight into radar-controlled kill zones, with their electronic warning alarms remaining completely silent. Manufactured primarily by the Chrysler Corporation, the complete SCR-584 architecture was seamlessly integrated with a heavy artillery battery featuring 4 90mm cannons, an autonomous power supply, an M9 gun director, and an IFF unit, which stands for Identification, Friend, or Foe, originally pioneered by the British. Every single piece of this complex network stood as a testament to the sheer superiority of American industrial engineering. At its heart, the cavity magnetron blasted out an astonishing 300 kilowatts of microwave energy, a raw output that easily dwarfed the power of massive stationary German radar complexes. Intricate servo mechanisms handled the automatic tracking with a level of mechanical precision that Axis factories were entirely incapable of duplicating, while the M9 director instantaneously executed complex ballistic mathematics that previously demanded entire rooms full of human calculators. Fusing these disparate breakthroughs into a unified, deadly platform represented a profound conceptual evolution that had completely eluded German strategic planners. Officially designated as the SCR-584 anti-aircraft gun laying system, roughly 1,500 of these devastating arrays were deployed across the European and Pacific theaters beginning in the early months of 1944. Given that every single installation possessed the ability to effectively lock onto targets, blazing past at 600 miles per hour, a speed significantly exceeding any operational fighter in 1944, the technology possessed an inherent future-proofing that became absolutely crucial when Nazi jet fighters eventually entered the skies. By the middle of that year, the Luftwaffe was drowning in a severe crisis of completely unsustainable casualty rates. General Adolf Galland ominously documented that WWII had suffered a staggering 38% fatality rate among its fighter pilots in April 1944 alone, with Luftflotte 3 losing 24%, amounting to a devastating total of 489 dead aviators and 100 lost officers, while domestic flight schools could only manage to supply 396 replacements, a paltry sum that included just 62 officers. This catastrophic hemorrhage of manpower was not exclusively the result of intense aerial dogfights, as an increasing number of veteran flyers were being eradicated by ground fire of seemingly impossible precision. Close air support squadrons, which were the absolute backbone of Wehrmacht tactical operations, found themselves especially defenseless whenever they crossed into the optimal tracking radius of the SCR-584. Reflecting on this slaughter in his post-war memoir, The First and the Last, Adolf Galland bluntly observed that by 1944, closing in on Allied lines meant flying directly into grid squares where human death was being mathematically tabulated. The automated batteries no longer fired at an aircraft's current location, but rather exactly where it was destined to be, leaving German airmen with absolutely no viable tactics or countermeasures, but solely dependent on blind luck. It was not until the desperate Ardennes offensive in December 1944 that retreating German infantry finally managed to overrun and capture a damaged, yet entirely whole, SCR-584 installation on the outskirts of Saint-Vite. Dr. Hans Plendl, the foremost radar authority in the Third Reich, immediately spearheaded a rigorous technical teardown of the prize, ultimately delivering a thoroughly crushing assessment to the military leadership. He starkly warned that American engineers had successfully weaponized automated tracking with a level of accuracy previously deemed scientifically unattainable, utilizing frequencies that Axis sensors could neither identify nor jam, and, most terrifyingly, were mass-producing these marvels on assembly lines, while German scientists were still fighting to handcraft crude laboratory prototypes, cementing the grim reality that the Reich was not merely trailing by a few months, but was irreparably years behind, without the slightest hope of ever closing the gap. As you delve into this historical account, you will discover that the acquired American hardware showcased groundbreaking advancements that scientists in Germany had previously dismissed as theoretically unattainable. This revolutionary equipment featured autonomous target tracking that held its lock through aggressive, evasive maneuvers, alongside the electronic calculation of three-dimensional firing coordinates and the flawless synchronization of radar, processing units, and artillery. Unfortunately for the Axis forces, you can see that this revelation arrived far too late in the conflict for them to engineer any effective countermeasures or build comparable defensive networks. The profound sense of technological impotence felt by Luftwaffe aviators ultimately fueled the infamous fighter pilots' mutiny in January of 1945. Prominent flying aces, notably Adolf Galland, Johannes Steinhoff, and Gunther Lützow, directly challenged Hermann Göring regarding the utterly hopeless nature of their aerial combat operations. Possessing 176 verified aerial victories, Steinhoff bluntly informed the Reichsmarschall that they were no longer engaging human adversaries, but rather battling cold mathematics, continuously computed by advanced machinery. He emphasized that personal flying expertise had been rendered entirely meaningless in the face of such ruthless automation, fiercely pushing back against accusations of cowardice by pointing out that sheer bravery could never overcome sophisticated technology that the Third Reich simply did not possess. You must understand that these outspoken aviators were by no means defeatists. They stood among the most highly decorated combat veterans within the German military ranks. Their grim realization that time-honored martial virtues had been completely nullified by automated weaponry marked a devastating psychological collapse for the armed forces. Göring reacted to this harsh truth by stripping Galland of his leadership position and issuing threats of court-martial, clearly illustrating to you the High Command's absolute refusal to acknowledge the shifting technological landscape of the war. Not even the introduction of the groundbreaking Messerschmitt 262 jet fighter could offer sanctuary from artillery guided by the SCR-584 radar, while the aircraft's astonishing velocity of 540 miles per hour rendered it virtually invulnerable to conventional Allied pursuit planes. That pace meant absolutely nothing to sensory arrays engineered to lock onto objects moving at 600 miles per hour. As Oberstleutnant Heinz Baer, an exceptionally successful German jet ace, recounted to investigators following the conflict, the pilots initially trusted their unprecedented speed to shield them from anti-aircraft flak. They were horrified to learn that the American batteries followed their flight paths flawlessly, delivering explosive shells to the exact coordinates where the jets were heading, proving to them that moving faster merely reduced their own window for evasion, and leading to the loss of multiple aircraft to impossibly precise ground fire. When you analyze the capabilities of the SCR-584, its ability to reliably monitor and obliterate jet-propelled fighters highlighted a level of American strategic foresight that was entirely absent in German military development. Designed to meet demanding specifications that vastly outstripped the capabilities of any plane flying in 1942, the system maintained its lethal effectiveness against advanced aerospace engineering that would not even debut until the latter half of 1944. A careful review of manufacturing data will reveal to you an overwhelming industrial disparity that essentially sealed Germany's fate, completely independent of any tactical brilliance they might have mustered. To illustrate, the Chrysler Corporation alone assembled 2,098 units, contributing to a confirmed total production minimum of over 1,700 radar platforms. Additional systems rolled off assembly lines at General Electric and Westinghouse, driving the individual unit cost down from $50,000 to less than $10,000, while achieving a staggering peak output of more than 50 units every single month. In stark contrast, Germany's wartime manufacturing yielded roughly 1,500 Würzburg radar arrays throughout the entirety of the conflict, with the combined output of all their domestic radar variants barely reaching 4,000 units. Because the Axis machinery was predominantly assembled by hand, they never achieved any meaningful reduction in manufacturing costs and suffered from severely restricted output capabilities until the bitter end. As you compare these figures, you will recognize that this gaping quantitative chasm underscored fundamental strengths inherent in the manufacturing culture of the United States, which purposefully engineered the SCR-584 so that recently drafted civilians could operate it proficiently following a mere 6 weeks of instruction. Conversely, the highly intricate German electronic networks demanded the expertise of credentialed engineers and seasoned technicians who had undergone many months of rigorous, specialized education just to keep the equipment running. Moving past mere technical blueprints, you will find that the SCR-584 exhibited phenomenal operational benefits that exponentially boosted its combat utility, particularly regarding rapid deployment and field mobility. American crews could have the array fully functioning within 30 minutes of reaching a site, whereas competing German configurations routinely required several hours to deploy, an agility that became absolutely vital during the highly dynamic Italian offensive, allowing advancing Allied divisions to establish instantaneous anti-aircraft umbrellas. Furthermore, the equipment functioned completely unhindered by atmospheric conditions, scanning flawlessly through heavy rain, driving snow, and dense fog that rendered optical rangefinders useless and severely handicapped the performance of Axis radar installations. The implementation of a modular architectural design drastically simplified field maintenance, empowering basic operators to swap out defective components instantly, whereas German setups like the massive Würzburg Riese demanded 8-man crews and highly specialized mechanics for the most trivial of repairs, compared to a lean American operating team of only 3 individuals. Reflecting on the conflict during post-war interrogations, Field Marshal Albert Kesselring confessed that radar-directed American artillery had completely neutralized any possibility of German close air support as early as the beginning of 1944. The Wehrmacht, historically celebrated for inventing modern combined arms maneuver warfare, suddenly found itself stumbling blindly across the battlefield, while Allied forces scrutinized their every move from the skies above. As you examine the campaign against the V-1 flying bombs, you will see quantifiable, statistically backed proof of this sweeping technological leap forward. While conventional targeting techniques only yielded a 17% interception success rate during the initial week of attacks, that figure surged to 60% by the 4th week, climbed to a consistent 74% average by week 8, and peaked at a staggering 82% on their most successful day, all while increasing ammunition efficiency by a factor of 25. These remarkable interception metrics marked a watershed moment in military history, representing the very first instance where ground-based defensive batteries established overwhelming and sustained dominance against airborne threats. Although the V-1 operated as a crude early iteration of a cruise missile, traveling along easily calculable trajectories, its rapid cruising speed of 400 miles per hour had initially rendered it virtually immune to standard anti-aircraft intercept strategies. The deployment of the SCR-584 radically rewrote the rules of engagement, abruptly neutralizing German electronic warfare tactics that had previously decimated British radar networks in the war's opening stages. Sophisticated Luftwaffe jamming devices, calibrated to disrupt meter-band wavelengths, were completely powerless against the new microwave-based frequencies, and you will note that the meticulously cut strips of German Doppelchaff proved equally worthless at confusing the advanced American sensors. This systemic failure stemmed from deeply flawed assumptions within German military doctrine, which wrongly presumed that opposing forces were utilizing identical technological frameworks. The notion that the United States might be exploiting entirely different physical principles for their detection arrays was never even entertained until captured Allied hardware finally exposed the glaring truth. At which point, the crumbling Third Reich possessed neither the industrial capacity nor the time to fabricate suitable defenses. Consequently, the tactical footprint of the SCR-584 expanded far beyond the mere tally of downed aircraft. It effectively blinded Wehrmacht intelligence divisions by completely shutting down all aerial reconnaissance efforts. Because Axis commanders were stripped of their ability to monitor Allied staging areas, trace the flow of infantry, or probe for defensive vulnerabilities, this severe intelligence blackout became a primary catalyst for Germany's cascading strategic blunders throughout 1944 and 1945. As General der Panzertruppe Hasso von Manteuffel, commander of the 5th Panzer Army during the grueling Battle of the Bulge, grimly summarized the situation for you, his forces were forced to attack completely blind in the Ardennes because their scout planes simply could not survive the airspace above the enemy lines. Remaining completely ignorant of the adversary's reserves in troop maneuvers, we found that achieving the crucial element of surprise became entirely unfeasible when only our opponents possessed the gift of sight. To the aviators of the Luftwaffe, the introduction of the SCR-584 radar system embodied a profound psychological catastrophe, as it introduced a terrifying new reality where lethal force was administered by unfeeling machinery, entirely stripping human prowess from the battlefield. Veteran flyers, who had dedicated countless hours to their training and walked away from hundreds of perilous sorties wearing their country's most prestigious medals, suddenly realized they were utterly defenseless against cold, calculating automation. Accounts from those who lived through these encounters lay bare the profound mental toll this technology extracted. Heinz Heinrich Baer, an ace who concluded the conflict, boasting 220 aerial triumphs, observed that while battling rival pilots represented the traditional understanding of warfare, a contest of mutual bravery and ability, the implementation of radar-directed artillery felt less like combat and more like clinical mathematical execution. The realization that there was no glory to be found in being obliterated by automated computations eroded their fighting spirit far more severely than the basic dread of dying. While these German airmen had long embraced the possibility of their own demise as a core component of their martial code, they found themselves completely unable to process their sudden obsolescence, horrified that their hard-won expertise had been diminished to insignificant variables within a formula they possessed no power to alter. Following the capitulation of the Third Reich, intelligence personnel from the Allied forces showcased the capabilities of the SCR-584 to detained German commanders, eliciting responses that varied from sheer astonishment to a grim, resentful acknowledgement. A significant number of these prisoners voiced a profound sense of closure upon finally comprehending the exact nature of the unseen terror that had decimated their ranks. Decades later, in 1985, Dr. Wilhelm Runge, a key figure in Germany's own radar program, confessed that their leadership had systematically ignored any intelligence that challenged their preconceived notions regarding American technological limits. He acknowledged that instead of conceding the straightforward reality of superior Allied engineering, they fabricated convoluted hypotheses to rationalize the seemingly miraculous precision of enemy anti-aircraft fire, a brand of hubris that ultimately condemned thousands of their own men to their graves. The systemic failure of the German armed forces to acknowledge the technological supremacy of the United States was deeply rooted in their foundational cultural prejudices. Having led the world in tactical advancements during the 1930s, the Wehrmacht found it completely unfathomable that overseas engineers could eclipse their own celebrated scientific achievements, a state of denial that endured even as undeniable proof accumulated over the course of 1944. Following the cessation of hostilities, this revolutionary apparatus was repurposed for the A/MPQ-12 and A/MPM-38 setups, eventually guiding the MGM-5 Corporal, which served as a mobile artillery missile platform for the United States military. The core tenets pioneered by the SCR-584, specifically automated target tracking, algorithmic trajectory prediction, and seamless component integration, laid the essential groundwork for every subsequent generation of anti-aircraft weaponry. by demonstrating conclusively that a robust defensive umbrella necessitated the complete elimination of human reflexes from the firing sequence. This innovation directly spawned the conceptual framework for all contemporary surface-to-air missiles, dictating the trajectory of military research throughout the Cold War and into the modern era. Although the widespread destruction of wartime archives makes compiling comprehensive statistics virtually impossible, the surviving data paints a clear picture of the SCR-584's ruinous efficiency on the battlefield. Historical records verify a minimum manufacturing run of 1,700 units, with the Chrysler Corporation alone documenting the assembly of 2,098 installations, reaching a manufacturing zenith that exceeded 50 completed systems per month. On the operational front, its debut during the Anzio landings resulted in the immediate obliteration of 7 out of 12 attacking bombers, representing a lethal success rate of 58%. Furthermore, the system achieved a staggering 82% interception efficiency against V-1 flying bombs, while simultaneously improving ammunition economy by a 25-fold margin, and a mere 39 active arrays were sufficient to blanket the Normandy beaches with impenetrable aerial overwatch during the D-Day invasions. Its technical specifications were equally unmatched, boasting a detection radius of 40 miles, double that of its Axis counterparts, and an accuracy margin of just 75 feet compared to the German standard of over 500 feet. It combined fully automated tracking with a rapid 30-minute deployment window that vastly outperformed the 2 or more hours required by enemy crews. The devastating clash between Axis forces and the SCR-584 serves as a timeless historical tutorial for you on the catastrophic consequences of technological ambush during wartime. Trapped by their own theoretical dogmas and blinded by an unshakable belief in their inherent superiority, high-ranking German officials continuously ordered their aviators into the teeth of a sophisticated menace that they neither comprehended nor possessed the means to neutralize. Reflecting on this monumental oversight, General Paul Deichmann eloquently encapsulated the disaster, noting that their leadership selectively digested only the information they preferred to hear, effortlessly rationalizing away any conflicting data. He lamented their stubborn refusal to concede that American inventors had materialized exactly what their own brightest minds had deemed impossible, noting that by the time they finally opened their eyes to the truth, their once mighty air armada had been effectively annihilated. Ultimately, the fatal flaw lay not in their reconnaissance gathering, but in the arrogant interpretation of those findings. Frontline observers transmitted highly accurate appraisals of American anti-aircraft lethality, yet these dispatches were routinely tossed aside simply because they violated the establishment's rigid underestimation of Allied ingenuity, a collective psychological blind spot that inflicted far more devastation than any conventional espionage ever could. As you examine the historical landscape, it becomes evident that the SCR-584 perfectly encapsulated the core ethos of American industrial might, prioritizing standardized simplification and the sheer scale of mass production. Instead of treating each individual unit as a bespoke masterpiece, visionary engineers from the United States consciously tailored their blueprints to ensure dependable, large-scale manufacturing. Drawing heavy inspiration from the automotive sector, this utilitarian strategy definitively outperformed the meticulous, artisanal precision championed by the Germans when applied to the harsh realities of global conflict. This stark dichotomy seamlessly bled into their respective operational doctrines. Where the European tradition fetishized individual mastery and hyper-specialization, the transatlantic approach fiercely championed streamlined usability and self-operating systems. Ultimately, this groundbreaking radar installation triumphed precisely because it excised the variable of human talent from the combat loop, rendering years of specialized training utterly obsolete and democratizing access to cutting-edge lethality in a way that proved absolutely decisive in the context of total war. Ultimately, The deployment of this technology signaled the definitive conclusion of aerial combat as a romanticized duel of human dexterity, violently ushering in the modern era of automated, push-button warfare that still dominates the contemporary battlefield. For the airmen of the Luftwaffe, this paradigm shift manifested as an utterly bewildering trauma, as they had launched their campaigns viewing themselves as the modern equivalent of airborne knights, only to finish the conflict as the unfortunate casualties of merciless, algorithmic computations. Providing what is perhaps the most profound post-war evaluation of this phenomenon, the legendary aviator Johannes Steinhoff reflected that this specific radar array obliterated far more than just their flying machines. It completely shattered their foundational understanding of armed conflict itself. He recognized that while his comrades operated under the illusion that victory belonged to the brave, the skilled, and the resolute, the Allied forces decisively proved that the future of conquest belonged to industrial output, technological innovation, and relentless automation. In the end, these undeniably magnificent warriors were systematically dismantled by vastly superior machinery, solidifying the SCR-584 radar network as one of the most pivotal instruments of the Second World War, remembered not merely for the staggering number of planes it tore from the sky, but for the terrifying new epoch of warfare it boldly introduced. You are witnessing the ultimate victory of methodical, technological dominance over conventional battlefield valor. The aviators of the Luftwaffe confronted an adversary incapable of missing, simply because it had entirely eradicated human fallibility from the targeting equation. High Command categorically refused to acknowledge this groundbreaking reality, leaving their own pilots completely bewildered by the opposition they encountered. Whenever frontline reports detailed impossibly precise anti-aircraft fire or suggested the existence of automated tracking capabilities, superiors routinely waved them away as pure fabrications or hysterical exaggerations. Long before their leading scientists finally dismantled captured SCR-584 radar units to grasp the underlying engineering, the German air fleet had already been ground down to a state of absolute irrelevance. Acknowledging that advanced American technology had utterly dismantled their aerial supremacy would have forced the military hierarchy to concede a profound lag in scientific, industrial, and strategic progress. A mental blockade they stubbornly maintained until total societal collapse forced their eyes open. For the flight crews navigating those contested skies, this formidable radar apparatus represented mechanical doom, executing strikes with flawless geometric certainty while remaining entirely indifferent to personal bravery. They were unknowingly crossing into a digitized slaughterhouse where complex algorithms determined their demise long before they even entered the physical engagement zone. High above the European continent, the romanticized era of the traditional fighter ace met its abrupt conclusion, permanently grounded by an unseen electronic grid that monitored silently, computed instantaneously, and executed with robotic autonomy. The historical footprint of the SCR-584 reaches far beyond its immediate wartime deployment, as it fundamentally forged the blueprint for contemporary aerial defense networks, and vividly demonstrated that triumph in industrialized conflict inevitably goes to whichever faction successfully automates the lethal sequence. As their fighting strength was systematically dismantled, plane by plane, the German forces tragically discovered that their true opponent was not a team of human artillerymen, but rather applied mathematics, weaponized within relentless radar arrays. Their accumulated expertise and battlefield courage were suddenly reduced to meaningless variables inside an inescapable calculus, heralding a brutal new epoch of combat, where prevailing belongs strictly to the masters of technology, rather than the simply courageous.